Welcome. Sunday evening. And what can we say on a Sunday evening, Graham?
You can say it's cooler, so that's good.
Yeah, as a very positive start to our thoughts for this evening.
No longer like the
Charms.
Sahara Desert or Death Valley, California, which is fantastic.
Yes, I have memories of wearing a jumper in Death Valley, California that lives forever in a photograph, I seem
You,
to
you
recall.
you drove across America with me, overdressed from start to finish. It
Indeed.
it it it, it was like I don't know. Try to think of a better phrase than Billy Bunter. It was like a gentleman abroad. It may be 101 degrees, but I'm still going to dress properly and
I
smartly.
think Billy Bunter was more the shape, but that is true, Graham. So welcome. This is the sound of Charles Hutchinson, journalist, and with me as ever on Two Big Egos in a Small Car is Graham Charms, polymath, all-rounder, Harrogate legend. Yeah, no, I tell you, just on a separate topic to what we're going to talk about tonight, one of the Dransfield brothers has died, I noticed. The
I
folk,
know Barry. He actually came from Harrogate, yeah,
yeah,
and they got to be quite successful in the early 70s in
yeah.
the folk revival that Magna Carta were part of, and
Mm,
Lindisfarne and Fairport Convention.
mm.
And then he kept going, and he used to play locally with his brother around Harrogate in the 80s and 90s. And when I did a special Charm Folk Night at the Blues Bar about 2003,
Yeah.
where I linked up with Harrogate Folk Club and mixed charm sort of indie alternative rock music with
Mm,
proper folk, and we had live music and blah, blah, blah.
mm.
Part of me thinks that Barry turned up. This is probably
Mm.
not true, but it's sort of it's in the back of my head. I'm sure
Yeah.
it can't be true.
Yeah. I
I
just
remember
noticed it
probably
was
true.
in one of the monthly magazines. They just mentioned his
Mm.
passing, so we reflect on that. Graham, first subject for tonight, and sci-fi writer Isaac Asimov, 1951 novel Foundation. What it says about now, and what it also says about Star Wars. And I don't know whether you mean the ongoing series of Star Wars that seems to sprout more and more tentacles that I can't keep up with, or whether you mean classic George Lucas Star Wars.
Well, the new one is still linked to the old one, like the DNA of the current Star Wars. Well, the direction of the current Star Wars is still linked to the DNA of the original
Mm,
George Lucas trilogy of films in the 70s, early 80s. And Foundation came out in 1951. At that point, Asimov was already famous. He was
yeah.
born in Smolensk, Russia in 1920, but moved to America. And his most famous book was I, Robot, which was written about 1942 and
Mm,
was made into a film starring Will Smith about 20 years ago, 12 years ago. And I, Robot is astounding because it explores all the dangers and pitfalls and contradictions and conundrums of artificial intelligence and robots. And Foundation doesn't do that. Instead, it's still set in the deep future, still a lot of technology in it, futuristic technology, which still sort of stands up
mm.
all these years later. And it's just as good as iRobot, but less philosophical. It's more about politics and power in a crumbling galactic empire. And that's where it sort of resonates with now because, the Western world to a degree is sort of crumbling. Now, it
Yes.
probably in the long run isn't really crumbling, but it feels a bit crumbly right now, like a rhubarb crumble. And so the book's about how the empire's trying to survive. And at one point, it creates this team of scientists and scholars who are given their own planet as a to create a reservoir of human knowledge so that when the empire does crumble, it'll be able to revive again because it'll still have all the knowledge and history that it had before, rather have it start from scratch. And then the rest of the book, having set that scenario, is
Mm,
all the battles and wars that the Foundation, which is the scientists and scholars, have to fight, and all the political plotting because they're in a end of the galaxy surrounded by lots of other planets who are all scheming against them. So it's all about the political plotting and the, backstabbing and how to use power. And then on top of that, there's a sort of religious element because the scientists and scholars have special foresight powers of seeing the future and they build themselves a religious cult. And I thought, wait a minute, this sounds pretty much like Star Wars, a mix of
yeah.
technology, the future,
Yes.
empire building or empire decline, politics and power, battles, plus religion and
Yeah.
spirituality. This is completely Star Wars. There's no way that George Lucas hadn't read a bit of Asimov before he did Star Wars.
No, absolutely. So Foundation made into a film as well, or not made into a film?
No, no, Asimov, I, Robots had several adaptations, but apart
Yeah.
from that, his books haven't, mainly because he did series of books. So until Peter Jackson came along, no one would have touched Lord of the Rings
No, that's
because
true.
that was an epic,
Mm,
massive work of fiction over several huge volumes. And
mm,
Asimov's pretty much the same. There's no easy jumping in point or jumping out point of Asimov. You're taking a huge thing. And, no one took on Tolkien properly before Peter Jackson. It requires someone else who loves Asimov enough and who's talented enough and big enough in the film industry to even think about tackling Asimov in the cinema.
For those unaware of the significance of Asimov, I mean, how much does the roots and how much does the American side of him conflate in his writing, do you think?
Well, you could argue that all the power and the politics and the violence comes from being brought up in America, but
Hmm.
at the time you also had the Soviet Union being turned into a massive
Yep,
dictatorship by Stalin.
yep.
So since he was born in Russia in 1920, you got to think that's playing at the back of his mind as
Mm,
well.
mm.
He died in 1992, and he's the sort of person whose books will still be relevant in 100 years' time. They're almost like they're all very philosophical, and it's almost like even though they're set in the future, it's almost like Asimov is imparting ancient wisdom to his readers.
Which is what I mean. Sci-fi obviously looks forward, but it's actually invariably it draws on what's going on now, and it draws on the past sci-fi. Yes, it's predictive on one level, but it's drawing on characteristics that have always been there with humanity, and maybe predicting the worst consequences of them in the future.
Yeah, it's almost Shakespearean. If you think about how good Shakespeare is
Mm,
at doing characters who are powerful and
mm.
watching how they manage to abuse and misuse that power, sometimes to their own folly, to their own
Macbeth.
fall. Yeah,
Mhm,
there's a lot of Shakespeare in Asimov as well.
mm. Yeah, well, Graham, thank you for the introduction to that. Number two for this evening. This is the young uh, Cuore Chamber Orchestra, who you've featured quite prominently in the Harrogate Advertiser since they started. And this is reviving the past at Harrogate Royal Hall with the young Cuore Chamber Orchestra. Was this part of any festival in Harrogate, or was it a concert that just existed in its own right?
Now, it was the Quarry's final concert of their debut season. They were
Mm,
launched in May 2025, and their
mm,
final concert season was May 2026.
mm.
And it was appropriate it should be in the Royal Hall because apart from the fact that their ambassador to the orchestra is Freddie Fox, the great actor
Ah,
from
yes,
TV and
yes.
film, especially
Mm,
Slow Horses. Well,
mm.
Freddie's the great grandson of Samson Fox, who
Yeah,
actually built the
he
Royal
built
Hall
built the
in
Royal
Harrogate
Hall.
in
Mm.
1900. So the whole thing came full circle. And also they do play some modern pieces of the choir. They're quite ambitious, and they're all young professional musicians. It's not amateur, and they're aspiring to be the new Halley for Yorkshire. They've got really high ambitions under William Dutton, their founder and conductor, who looks fairly youthful still himself. And they played Mendelssohn and Beethoven's Seventh. So it's mainly music from the past because that's what the great symphonies are. There are very few great symphonies written anymore because that era of the Romantic Symphony ended really 100 years ago. And on
Exactly.
top of that, you've also got the fact that, I mean, the Royal Hall in Harrogate's got such a pedigree. I mean,
Mm.
Elgar performed there.
Yes.
So the standard of the Quarry was so good in their final concert of their debut season.
Mm.
And the venue is so steeped in cultural history and classical music history that you thought, well, it looks like the venue looked because it was restored about 20 years ago at vast
Mm.
cost. It's
Mm.
a magnificent building, as you know.
Absolutely.
You could have been there. You could have been sitting there watching music in 1903 or 1904. That's what it
Gosh,
felt like. It felt like the past had never ended.
this the professional. orchestra, or is that impractical at the moment? I mean,
No,
when
no,
you set
no,
a new
professional.
orchestra up,
It's all professional musicians,
yeah,
not just from Yorkshire, from around the world, all of the
gosh,
high standard of players. And
gosh,
so they're really aspiring to be a long-term, significant orchestra that would eventually play at the Royal Albert Hall, that sort of stuff. Now they know they're only in their early stages. They know
mm,
they've got a long way to go. They know especially they need a lot more financial backing because to run a professional orchestra, even though it's
exactly.
a chamber orchestra, it's quite a big chamber orchestra, is
Mm,
hellishly expensive.
mm.
But their standard is so high and their focus is so strong and so keen. And they're such a nice bunch of people with a good, positive attitude. It's who's to say they're not going to do it? Who's to say that in 50 years' time the Quarry won't be famous internationally?
They've played predominantly Harrogate, or have they managed to branch out elsewhere?
Yeah. Their Leeds debut, because they see themselves as a Yorkshire orchestra, an orchestra for Yorkshire as
Mm,
well as the world. They played the Herd Assembly Room earlier this year, and they were magnificent in Leeds.
yeah, yeah. So, you've interviewed the conductor before, I think, Graham, haven't you? I think you featured him in the
Yeah,
Harrogate
several times. Yeah,
Advertiser. Yeah.
in the Harrogate Advertiser. Yeah.
In terms of where he goes in year two, has he outlined to you any strategy of what they need to do next?
I think they know what they need to do next, and I think they're engaged on doing that. But I keep
Mm,
on coming up with silly ideas like they should play in the streets, or they should play a concert for the homeless, where the homeless are the audience, because
mhm.
they need to do something to raise the profile beyond the world of classical music. Because as you know, although classical music is stronger in Harrogate, in Yorkshire, and in
Yes,
Britain
yes,
than it
yes.
is in America,
Mm,
the amount of money in classical music now to support it is struggling, and the
mm.
amount of time that schools now devote to classical music is struggling.
Yep.
So they're in a tough environment. So I keep on thinking of silly gimmicks and stunts to raise the profile, but they quite sensibly ignore them for good reasons.
I don't think classical music's ever really gone down. I mean, who did stunts? Probably Nigel Kennedy is the only one we can think of. I would have, well,
Yeah.
I could think of
Well,
who
that's true, but if you were
who
to
was
ask anyone in the street
not
now,
averse to doing not averse to
yeah.
doing a stunt.
Well, I think you should keep the standard of the music and your programs that you choose to play very high, but you should grasp any opportunity to make orchestras more popular and more populous. And I don't mean by playing film themes, which I
No.
don't really like. I'd
Yep.
rather play proper, brilliant symphonies. But you should throw away entirely the old days of elitism, snobbery, and formality that classical music for a long time is associated with. That's just my personal point of view. If it wants to have a thriving future, it needs to change how it engages with the outside world, the world outside classical music.
Not easy, Graham. It's not easy to do.
No.
Because obviously there's a kind of comfort zone within which classical music is played, um, how it's presented. I mean, if you were to throw formerly of Slung Low, someone like Alan Lane at it, just in terms of how he now, I know he's now running the Edinburgh Tattoo, but how he, with his wonderful visions of how you take the arts
Mm.
from where it's expected to be into unexpected places, such as
Well,
train
here's a
carriages, such
simple
as
here's
docks
you're
in
right.
Leeds.
Yeah. Here's a simple idea, and it's not going to change the world of classical music, but
No,
it's a simple thing. Orchestras used to always wear those penguin outfits,
they did.
black and white suits. That is now becoming more old fashioned. They're all dressed a bit more informally,
Mm.
open neck shirts and things, but they're all dressed in black or grey
Black.
mainly.
Everywhere you look,
Can you
black.
can you imagine if you went to see an orchestra, a good orchestra,
Mm,
and
mm,
every single person in the orchestra was dressed in red from head
mm.
to toe? I mean, that's only a small bit of theatricality, but it would already make the visual pleasure of watching an orchestra
Yeah.
better as an event.
I
And that's
mean,
all I'm saying.
even orchestral maneuvers in the dark the other night were dressed in black.
Well, that's because they reached a certain age of thinking they want to look respectable.
So you're asking classical music to do the reverse of that.
Well, to be honest, most classical musicians, and especially in the Cuore, who are a young orchestra, are
Mm.
younger than the two main members of OMD
Yep, 67 they are. Yeah.
and slimmer, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, wherever I go to see anything that involves an orchestra playing, they're always in black, wherever I go.
Well, yeah, even though they don't wear
Back in black.
ties, they don't wear ties anymore, but they're sitting there looking boring, quite frankly, and they're on stage. And I'm not saying like dressed like clowns. I mean, the Beatles, when they had a posh orchestra in to record the strings in A Day in
Yes.
the Life during the Sergeant Pepper sessions in '67,
Yeah.
they made them all wear clown outfits and big noses and all that, just to try and loosen the classical musicians up, because there was a great barrier between classical music and
Yeah.
rock music then. So I'm not suggesting anything silly. I'm just saying think visually. Just think of the visual aspect you could bring in without affecting the music, without looking stupid, that would elevate the whole performance
I-
and the atmosphere and the impact on the crowd.
So that it's about elevation, not about gimmick. And that's what I
No
think.
gimmick, no, not gimmicks.
No,
No,
I know, but I think that's probably what classical musicians are frightened of, being accused of gimmickry.
yeah, but they used to be frightened of playing rock music or playing film themes, and
Yes.
now almost any classical musician in Britain has played rock music and film themes.
Yeah.
So they've changed there. They can change again.
I mean, if you look at the popularity of John Wilson, for example, yes,
Mm,
of course, has
mm,
played in Harrogate regularly, hasn't he, over the years? And
exactly. Yeah.
he's done, I
Thanks
think,
to Harrogate National Festivals. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. They've done that. He's just done Rydell Festival with a program of light classical music, and so he's found a way to tap into freshening it up, brightening it up, without it being a gimmick.
Well, it's this is the whole point. You can change without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm, mm. I wonder if that ever happened.
There was a short movement towards allowing the audience to applaud between movements because, as you know, the formality of applause and the audience role
Oh
in
yes,
classical music concerts is very, very. It's not written down, but you know how to
it's
behave. You
almost
do not
sacred.
clap between movements, and when classical music was younger in the 18th century, 19th century, people would
Mm.
clap between movements, and somehow that became a convention. You didn't clap between movements, so everything's up for grabs. That doesn't ruin the music, as far as I'm concerned. If it ruins the music, don't do it. It's an obvious rule.
I think that the no clapping thing is where people perceive an elitism about classical music and a stuffed shirt element of some supporters of classical music who delight in chiding those who do not know that they're not supposed to applaud. And I think that's one of the areas actually that you're quite right, and a new orchestra could absolutely challenge that. And why not? I mean, I would have doubted that when these pieces were written in brackets, it said no applause, please, until the end. How this convention came about.
No, classical music has created a fortress for itself where it's safe
Mm,
within the fortress and it's
mm,
got supporters inside the fortress that keep it going.
yeah.
And it engages with the world land beyond the fortress in a very gingerly, cautious, slightly scared fashion.
Yes. Well, we look forward to seeing what happens in year two. And I still can't pronounce
Cuore. I think it's a
What?
Italian word for heart and passion,
It
of
is.
which the Cuore have a lot.
Oh, absolutely. So, Graham, you and I, a couple of albums to look at. Yard Act have just released their third album. And let's talk about that first, if we may. And
We'll have to be quick because we'll run out of time if we don't.
well, that's fine. But let's talk about
Yeah.
that first. Over to you.
Have you heard it, Charles?
Not yet. It is on my purchase
Mm.
list for next week.
Well, as you know, it's the third album. You're going to need a little music on Island Records.
Yeah.
The main protagonists in the band being James Smith, the wordsmith, and Ryan Needham, the instrumentalist who came from previous Leeds indie bands from the last golden era of Leeds indie
Mm,
music in
mm.
the tens and the 1990s and the noughties. And you're going to need a little music. Sort of says straight away, this is a different album. It's the first album title where you think that sounds like it could have been an album title for Harry Styles, which which the previous two, the Overload and Where's My Utopia,
Mm.
it didn't sound like a Harry Styles album. And
No.
you get a feeling that they've decided they're going to try and be more audience friendly because the Overload was as you know, was your perfect post punk influenced
Yeah.
agit-prop
Yeah.
indie, slightly rappy spoken word,
Yep.
guitar based DIY lo-fi album, perfectly attuned to the sort of people who love the Broodnow Social Club
Hmm.
or who were elected Duchess in Leeds before that was closed down.
Yes.
Whereas on Where's My Utopia, it was all much more richly produced, dance orientated, slightly very personal lyrics by James,
Mm.
very atmospheric, but only a few sort of guitar tunes. This one, You're Gonna Need a Little Music, is all guitar tunes, and it's all really focused, and it's all really snappy. And although it's still mainly spoken word by James Smith, there's almost singing by James Smith on it, and there's loads of hooks. There's even a pop song on a Yard Act album. So they really are trying to connect with an audience with this one.
Now, I mean, sometimes it can be record company pressure to do something like this. I mean, it can be like Royston Vasey becoming the Leeds band that are hugely successful. Uh, how that happened, almost a deliberately commercial decision to change. This is, but that involved a change of name, etc., etc. This is this a band where you think this is entirely self-driven, or has some influence come into this?
Well, James Smith and Ryan Needham are smart cookies and they've
Mm,
been around the block. So I think there'll be an element of them trying to deliberately connect, a bit like when Fontaines DC did their last album, Romance, which is their most accessible album to anybody who does not already like Fontaines DC. I think there's an element of that, but you've got to remember that Where's My Utopia, apart from a couple of tracks, sounds nothing like The Overload.
no.
So these are people who've changed a lot during their careers musically and who changed a lot on their second album. So the fact they've changed quite a bit on their third album, I don't think you can just put that down to like any sort of cynical attempt to sell more records. I
Mm,
think it's the sort of thing that Yard Act would do anyway. A bit like the Beta Band, like the Beta Band's first album, 1989, doesn't sound like Hot Shots in 2002, and Hot Shots didn't sound like, from Heroes to Zeros couple of years later. So I
mm,
think like in terms of like a newish band, I think Yard Act are probably the boldest music in terms of music, the boldest newish band. Because it's one thing being bold musically once you're already famous, like David Bowie did, or even Arctic Monkeys, but to be a new band and keep on changing your sound is quite unusual. So I think Yard Act are really bold for doing this.
yeah, yeah. I was when I said Royston Vasey, I meant Runston Parva for Kaiser Chiefs' first
Yeah,
name.
there are links though, because the League of Gentlemen, some of them used to hang around the Duchess and Leeds.
Yes, of course, of course. So, Graham, the album that I've been listening to a
Oh, I
lot.
was going to say one more thing.
Oh, go on,
It's
please.
actually very
Yeah,
good, the Yardak new album.
yeah.
There's strong songs, strong material.
Mm. And I mean, it's a band that changes that much in the space of three albums. I mean, that's more in the tradition of the Beatles making progress. Quite rare to see a band actually sort of reshaping itself this often. That's a good
I
thing.
think it's a good thing. I think if you look at back at James and Ryan's past, they've been in so many different good bands
Mm.
in the lead scene and beyond over the last 20 years. They've got they've got quite a pedigree of different sounds already in their top bag, to use some
Yeah,
sort of strange Australian phrase, which just isn't appropriate to any music criticism. So, it's because they're interesting guys. They're intelligent, interesting guys, and I think they'd find it impossible to keep on doing the same thing.
yeah, absolutely. So the album that I've been listening to, and I don't know, I'm assuming you've probably heard some of it or maybe all of it. Foreign Tongues. This is a new
Yeah,
band from London, the Rolling Stones,
bunch of youngsters.
and
Yeah,
a bunch of youngsters. And this is actually so it's a very quick follow up to Hackney Diamonds in 2023. Previously to that, of course, there was a cover versions album. I think around about 2016, Lonesome and Blue. And
yeah, that
this,
great album.
yet again, has been heralded as a the best album since type of reaction from overall with critics. And as usual with the Stones, when that is how it's rated, probably never quite matches up to that assertion. I think this probably comes closer than most to being the best Rolling Stones album since Some Girls.
Well, when I first heard the last album, 2023, Hackney Diamonds,
Mm.
at first I thought, oh, rubbish. Then I thought, oh, this is really good. And then I thought, oh, not so good.
Mm.
And I played it again recently, and I thought there's only three songs that are totally good on the whole of Hackney Diamonds. There's four that are fairly good, and the rest of them all sound good, but they're not very good songs. It's a bit like, and the producer Andrew Watt, who's also recently done Paul McCartney's The Boys Dungeoline
Yeah,
album,
he's done this new
as
album
well as
again as
both
well for the
Hackney
Stones.
Diamonds
Mm.
and Foreign Tongues.
Mm.
The last album, to me, when I played it again, it sounded like they'd asked someone who was a world famous Michelin starred chef
Mm.
to do something good with beans on toast. And
Yeah.
Andrew Watt had managed to sculpt beans on toast into looking momentarily like it was like some sort of like haute cuisine, but in
Mm.
fact it was still beans on toast. Well, I think Hackney Diamonds was basically, apart from the tracks that totally worked, like Rolling Stone Blues, the old blues track at the end, Dreamy Skies, the sort of like folk blues
Yes.
one, and
Yeah.
especially Sweet Sounds of Heaven with Lady Gaga. Those all
Yeah.
totally worked. I
Yeah.
thought basically Hackney Diamonds is really over elaborate version of Beans on Toast. So,
Mm.
so when I bought Foreign Tongues, I thought, here we go again, Beans on Toast Part Two. But in fact,
It's
there's a
better than
few
that, Graham.
differences
It's
between it,
better than
Hackney
that.
Diamonds and Foreign Tongues. First of all, you're right, Charles. It's got more decent songs
Definitely.
than Hackney Diamonds. It's
Absolutely.
got about 6, 7 decent songs out
Mm-mm.
of 14.
Yeah.
Secondly, whereas Hackney Diamonds sounds overproduced, the feel on Foreign Tongues is a bit more organic. And I
Yeah.
always think the Stones are best when they sound rootsy. You do not want overproduced Rolling Stones. You want them to sound rootsy. And
Mm.
Foreign Tongues sounds largely pretty rootsy. So that's a step forward already.
I mean, I think the guitars on it, Richards and Ronnie Wood, I think they're dueling, intertwining guitars are because it's not overburdened. It goes back to being what bloody great guitar players they are together, and that's part of the pleasure of this album. Is the fact that the guitars are allowed to breathe and play. There's a point very near the end where Mick Jagger urges Ronnie to play a solo, and you mean who knows how long these things will go on, and but you get a sense of there is an element of urgency about this album as well, and a sense of pleasure about it. Just every so often, I think it pushes itself a little bit too hard. There's still this thing that I still think the aging process actually would be interesting, and the one song that does of that is Keith Richards' song, "Some of Us."
Yeah, some of it is very good. Yeah.
I
But
mean,
Back in Your Life is very good as well. The sort of tough rock ballad that comes
yeah,
right before the
yeah,
cover of the bluesy Chuck Berry song "Beautiful Delilah." Back in
yeah.
Your Life is also works. But
And they
yes,
do.
yeah,
There's the cover. There's of course there's the cover of Amy Winehouse as well, isn't there on there?
you know
Which
I'm no
works
good.
well.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
superb. But that's
yeah.
because the Stones give the Stones a good song and let them just play their music, and they're always going to sound good. I
In
don't like when they put too much into it.
Yeah, and there are certain songs which try too hard. I think like Mr. Charm tries too hard.
Although
Um,
the chorus is the chorus is like a British indie rock band of 20 years ago,
yeah,
as is Divine Intervention. Divine Intervention, if it wasn't for Mick Jagger's singing, could
yes.
be an indie rock song, maybe Oasis B-side Divine Intervention.
And there's Robert Smith on guitar on there, of course.
Although
So
you can hardly tell
you
he's
could
there.
hardly tell. And Steve Winwood's on throughout the album, apart from one track where
Yeah,
there's a different pianist comes in. Bruno Mars apparently is on there, but goodness knows where. I mean, he might as well be
he's
on
playing
Mars, frankly.
cowbells.
Yeah, playing he's
Cowbells.
playing cowbells, marvelous.
Mm.
The song that I love is the country song "Ringing Hollow."
Yeah, that's very good. That's the album's version of Dreamy Skies, which is a totally good song on Hackney
Yeah,
Diamonds. Yeah,
yeah,
Ringing Hollow totally works. It's just a good song
yeah.
without playing too hard.
And then I think we should also say that Mick Jagger's singing is still remarkable.
That's the best thing about the album. I mean, it's got a lot of character and energy, which is good. The feel is good. But the best thing on the album is Mick Jagger's vocals. I would say of all the old timers from
Mm.
the 1960s still releasing new material, his vocals are the best of the whole bunch.
I mean,
You
he
couldn't
even
tell he
knocks
was
out
83.
absolutely, and he knocks out a falsetto vocal. No
Mm.
strain in the voice whatsoever. Compared with Keith, who was never a great singer, but is really quite struggling with the voice on some of us. But I think that adds, as I say, he shows signs of vulnerability, which isn't not that's something that Jagger doesn't really give into. Doesn't really give into aging. Still looking at the issues, are still drawn to talking about America. Still fascinated in country music. Still the odd political comment in there.
I would say two things, although it's a better album than Hackney Diamonds, and for a
Mm.
band of their age, it's really impressive.
Mm.
First of all, the songs aren't as good as Paul McCartney's recent album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane,
Thought we might
also
might
produced
come
by
to
Andrew
that
Watt.
because I was going to make that
And
comparison. Yeah, yeah.
and secondly, although this album is in nowhere near embarrassing,
Mm.
it is not as good as Tattoo You in 1981.
No,
It's not as good as Goat's Head Soup in 1973.
no.
And those are not particularly highly regarded Stones albums. So, in the long scheme of things, this isn't a return to their peak era form.
Mm.
It's just a really good effort for a band that's been going that long and are now so old.
If you were to pick out songs that could be added to a Stones live set from this album,
Well, they might be added to the live set for one tour, but if they were to be able to do another five tours, I
mm,
suspect every track in the album would stop being on the set list after the second tour.
including In the Stars, the obvious pop song on there.
Yeah, that's got a nice poppy chorus. It sounds a bit
Mm,
like sort of poppy U2.
mm,
But no, that wouldn't last. The Rough and Twisty Dumpling track's got a brilliant stomping swamp blues
yes.
feel, but that won't last. Even Ringing Hollow isn't guaranteed to last if
No.
the Stones were going to go on for another 20 years. But neither is anything in Hackney Diamonds. I don't see anything in that album that
Mm.
would end up in the set list in the year 2040, if that if that was even possible.
If they could cryogenically be kept going. So
But
Graham,
I
I
think
mean,
you have
I
to you
think
have to thank God for small mercies, and as
yes,
small mercies go, Foreign Tongues is a pretty big small mercy.
but you would rate McCartney's new album as superior.
Well, he's a better songwriter than the
Mm,
Stones anyway, although the Stones have written a lot of great songs.
mm,
The thing about Dylan and the Stones is they represent something beyond themselves. So critics love Dylan and the Stones because they
yeah,
represent eras and
yes,
meanings and ideas. But apart from when he's with the Beatles, McCartney's own is judged solely by how good his songs are.
yeah.
So although he gets good reviews, there isn't that same quite scale of reverence towards McCartney as towards the Stones and Dylan.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic Sub production.